Dr. Mark Williams is a cognitive neuroscientist, and he is on the podcast today. And honestly, this is a good one. I learned so much in this podcast. If you want to learn how to develop a better memory, if you want to improve your brain's health, if you want to learn about Alzheimer's, ADHD, anxiety, depression, all of these super fascinating and sometimes terrible things and what they do to the brain, then this is the podcast for you. Before we start this podcast, if you could do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, 5-star button, whatever it is, wherever you are, I'd really appreciate it. My name is Harrison Brown, and this is the Into the Mind podcast. If you're watching or listening, I hope this helps. So listen, Mark, thank you so much for coming on, mate. I suppose the first kind of thing that springs to mind is, how would you define cognitive neuroscience? What do you do?
Straight into it. Okay, let's go. So neuroscience has been around for a long time. So that's a study of the brain. But prior to, about 40 years ago, it was always either in animals or it was in dead humans, vast majority of it. And then, about 40 years ago, we started doing neuroimaging. So we started doing fMRI, so functional magnetic resonance imaging, MRIs you've probably heard of, and other EEG and all these things. So we started looking at humans, and they wanted a way of defining human neuroscience as opposed to all the other neuroscience that's out there. So cognitive is just really referring to the fact that humans are actually thinking when we're actually doing it. And cognitive was supposed to define it specifically to humans, but now we know a lot of animals actually have cognition, so it doesn't really define it to humans the way they were hoping. But it's basically, wake humans is what we do. We study the brains of wake humans.
And how are the brains of awake humans? You were saying there that some animals are now, they're kind of being defined as being cognitive. Is that the same with monkeys and primates?
Yeah, so monkeys and primates we now know do a lot more than we ever thought they did. I mean, there's some great studies going on in the US at the moment, over the last few years, showing that they even can use tokens as money, and they can actually exchange money for things of value and do these sorts of things, which is really crazy to think that they've got that level of intellect. But also we know, elephants can be amazingly artistic, for example, dolphins and these sort of animals as well. Whales and so on can be very, very intelligent in different ways to us, but very complex group dynamics and understanding of where they can catch food and how they can catch food and coordinating amongst their groups and so on and within their group. So there's been quite a change or a shift in the way we think about the way animals are thinking. Even octopus, right? Octopus, and we now know extremely intelligent animals, which no one would have thought of. And they have completely different brains now. So, the way they're thinking is mind-boggling. Seriously mind-boggling.
Octopuses, or octopi, I suppose is the plural. Octopi are wild creatures, man. Like, you see them changing color, transforming into something totally different, and they're super intelligent. One thing I was going to say, so there was a study. It wasn't even a study, it was more like a YouTube video I was watching recently, and it was about orangutans and how orangutans have a concept of fairness. If you were to give something to one orangutan but not to another, they'll freak out because they have a concept of fairness. Yeah. That's true?
Yeah. A lot of primates do. So they've done a study with, I forget what the species was, but one of the species of primate, and they give them coins, like little tokens as coins, and different coloured ones with different values. And if you paid one, capuchins I think they were, if you paid one more than another one for doing the same job, they get extremely upset by it. And also, they try to negotiate for food and for other things to get a better price on their rewards as well. So, amazing what they're able to do and understand.
Jeez, I was in Bali. I believe it's very close to you, actually, in Australia. I was in Bali quite recently, a couple of years ago, and there was a monkey that stole somebody's phone, and one of the guides says, well, you're going to have to give it food or else it's not going to give your phone back. So So they know how to bargain. But I suppose the positive thing, and that this is what I wanted to move on to next, is that monkeys don't have social media. So I don't think it's affecting their brain maybe as much as ours. So
I was just at the Banksy exhibition that's out here in Sydney, and one of his murals has a chimpanzee with a sign saying that, we've got to be nice because they're going to take over the world. And I think they might if we stay on social media and they stay off.
yeah, yeah. And how is social media affecting the brain?
Oh, in so many ways. Where do we start? I mean, one of the big things is how quickly we flick through it, because it's becoming so. If you look at something like TikTok, the actual videos that people watch are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, which is our attention span, and we know that our attention span is what controls what's in our long-term memory, so in our short-term memory. Sorry, so it's what we're aware of at any one point in time, and that awareness is very limited. So we've got to, when hopefully you're listening to me at the moment, so you're attending to what I'm saying and you're ignoring everything else that goes on in the room around you. And that takes effort. And you need to actually be constantly working that and making that stronger, just like any other muscle. But when we're on TikTok and these other social media programs, because everything comes and goes really quickly, our attention is flicking from one thing to another. So we're not actually controlling it. We're not actually maintaining it for long periods of time. So we're not actually exercising it. So we know our attention spans have now gotten more and more short. And we're less capable of actually attending to things for longer, which is why things like ADHD have become so prolific in society with younger kids, because they never actually work their attention mechanisms. So they never have good, strong attention mechanisms. So they're not able to attend to things for a long period of time. And we need to do that to actually think, right? To actually process information and think and get stuff into our long-term memory. So that's one of the really bad things that I don't think many people talk about. There's all the other stuff, which is really bad, which is, the pornography that's on it and the sexting that's on it and the kids being manipulated to do things they don't want to actually do, and young girls being paid to actually do things on TikTok, because now there's older men pay young girls to actually do things through TikTok and so on, and all of that stuff, which is awful, and the cyberbullying, and the access to stuff. I mean, we recently had the stabbing here in Bondi, and it was all over social media, and we had all these little kids watching this awful thing as it was actually happening, and then rewatching, which is really, really awful. And all those stuff is really bad. But just the effect that attention aspect of it is having on our brains, I think, is something that people don't really think a lot about, and it is having a really strong effect on kids especially, but teens as well, and adults, which is why we're less productive today than we have been ever. We get less done than we ever have before in the past. We're all feeling busier now, but we're actually not. We don't have more work to do or more things to do. We just don't get as much done because we're constantly flicking from one thing to another rather than just concentrating on one thing and knocking it off and then going to the next thing, which is the best way to actually spend your day. And in schools we're seeing huge issues with behavioural problems, with learning problems and all these things, and teachers leaving the profession. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that kids can't actually sit there and concentrate on one thing. And so they're getting in trouble when the teachers are constantly having to discipline them. And that all comes down to this constant bombardment of information, and a lack of us actually stopping and just attending to one thing at a time, which is what our brains are designed for. And we forget that our brains are the same squishy grey things that we had 2,000, 3,000, 10,000 years ago. It's the same. It hasn't changed. And yet we're now using this technology, which is manipulated in ways that we really haven't considered fully.
I don't think we fully understand the effects it's actually having as well, because it's so new. I mean, it was 3 years ago during TikTok when I started using it, was maybe 2 or 3 years ago during COVID. And
Yep.
I don't think we've really seen the impact or the aftershock of what is going to come from that. I think that ADHD is a really interesting one, because I got diagnosed with ADHD dyslexia when I was really, really young, maybe like 9 years old. So have the ADHD rates skyrocketed since the sort of the uptake in social media, TikTok, Instagram, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it has. It's gone through the roof since then. And the number of diagnoses has gone through the roof. And there's now some discussion in the clinical space about actually having two different diagnoses, and one which is, ADHD, which is a clinical, which is due to a genetic issue, and therefore that's what you would have been diagnosed with, whatever, quite a while ago. And then the other one, which is because of devices, digital ADHD, which is caused by spending time on devices and spending too much time on devices, or giving a child a device younger. So we know the younger a child's given a device, the more likely they'll be diagnosed with ADHD, and the more time they spend on device, the more likely they are to be diagnosed with ADHD. So yeah, there is this big discussion about the fact that there seems to be a percentage of those diagnoses now that are because of the devices, not because of a genetic component.
Wow. Okay, so they're literally making a split based on sort of social media, digital ADHD, so to speak.
Yeah, and the biggest problem is that ADHD, the diagnosis, is based on behaviour, and the behaviour of those two things is the same. So it's really difficult to determine which one's actually due to genetics and which one's actually due to devices. And it takes very honest parents to actually, differentiate between those two things.
Yeah.
But there is discussions amongst clinicians. That'll take a while. These things take a long time before they actually become put into the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, but I have no doubt it'll happen at some stage in the future.
Yeah, and I'm sure no parent wants to admit that they've given their child a phone at 3 years old, and it might have impacted them. So that's an interesting one. What's actually going on in the brain with ADHD? Is the brain chemistry of someone with ADHD different to a neurotypical person?
It's very difficult. We don't see huge differences in the actual brains, like the actual structure of the brain, between someone with ADHD and someone with neurotypical, or whatever you want to call somebody who doesn't have ADHD. The actual brain, the structure of the brains don't seem to be different. What seems to be different is activity in areas that are involved in that attention network that I was talking about. And so it seems to be that that's not as strong or not working as well in somebody with ADHD, and that's why they're easily distracted by things. Because there's two aspects of attention. So there's the external stuff that we call exogenous attention. That's the thing that captures your attention. So colors like reds, oranges, and yellows, they capture our attention, and when we see those, we see them. Noises capture our attention, movement captures our attention, and faces capture our attention. So if those things are in our environment, we're caught by them. And then you've got your endogenous attention, which is your internal drive, right? And that's what hopefully you're using to attend to me, rather than noticing things that are other things that are happening around you. And it's that endogenous attention in kids with ADHD that seems to be affected. They're not able to control that and actually just attend to one thing. They're flicking from multiple, from one thing to another, and they need to be doing something all the time.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I think that, especially even when I'm on holiday, if I'm not doing, I can't sit in the sun and relax. Like it's just not, it's not part of my DNA. I really, really struggle with it. If I've not constantly got stimulus going on, I really get frustrated and really, really bored. What about dyslexia? Is that the same kind of deal? Is there not much sort of fiscal change in the brain that you can see?
Yeah, again, we don't see much difference in the actual structure of the brain. It's more in the function and how it's actually working. But with dyslexia, there are multiple types of dyslexia. So it's hard to just say this is what dyslexia it is. But it's basically, so when we perceive the world, most of the time, we're not actually getting the information that's actually out there. We're actually generating it from our memories, from our prior memories. And so most of it is generated almost like a guess. We're guessing what's out there and then we're comparing it to the inputs. And with dyslexia, they seem to get a mismatch of the information. So the information is slightly wrong, if you like. So they'll mix up letters or they'll mix up words. So they have much more trouble actually reading the words. But I mean, I'm surprised there's not more people with dyslexia. If you consider the fact that the majority of people only learn how to read in the last generation, and our brains actually haven't evolved to enable us to read. We use other areas of our brain that actually evolved to do other things to actually read. And so it's amazing that we're actually able to read, right? Because we're actually using other areas of our brain to do it. And so the fact that so many of us actually learn to read, I think, is the amazing thing, rather than the fact that we have, disorders of reading such as dyslexia. But yeah, you got to remember, the vast majority of people only learn how to read in this generation, and most people, have only learned in the last one or two generations. So it's not something that our brains have actually evolved to do.
So what part of our brain are we using to read, so to speak?
So there's the areas that are involved in speech. So when you're actually reading, I mean, my wife laughs at me because when I'm reading a novel or whatever, my lips are constantly moving because again, we're actually reading, we're speaking to ourselves in our heads, right? You actually, So you're using the area of your brain which is actually involved in speech to actually generate the words and therefore understand the words and the concepts. And then there's areas involved in object perception and so on that are also active that you're actually, because that's why it's so important to read a lot, right? Because you're also activating these other areas where you're imagining what's actually happening to actually get the concepts across. And then there's actually, which is really funny, there's an area called the fusiform face area, which in people who haven't learned to read yet, it's on both sides of their brains. And then when you learn how to read, the area called the word form area, which is involved in reading, actually takes over one side of that fusiform face area. So the area that's involved in us recognizing faces, which we're extremely good at, and we've got two areas of, one of those areas gets taken over by the area to read.
Wow. Okay, that's very interesting. So it's we're using areas of our brain that shouldn't really be used for reading because we don't have an area for reading, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, it's extremely right. I talk about it as extremely expensive real estate, right? We've only got this small brain in our skulls, and we have a lot of things that we actually want to do with it, and we've got to decide which of the things we're going to do. So any bit that's not needed as much for one thing, we'll use for something else. A bit like New York, right? They had the High Line Park. They used to have a railway line, and then they stopped using it as a railway line, so they turned it into a park because there's no real estate in New York that's not used. It's the same as our brain. It's used for, this idea that we only use 10% of our brain is complete nonsense. We actually use all of it and all the time because it's constantly being used for stuff. It just depends on whether or not that's good stuff or bad stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think there is is this a myth that if you use one side of your brain that you're more creative than the other?
Yeah, we're always using all of our brain. The whole idea that we're using one side or the other is just constant. Yeah, absolute nonsense. Both areas of our brain are active all the time, and we're always using both of them. Some people have become better at doing creative stuff because they do it a lot, and some people are better at analytical stuff because they do it a lot. But the amount of genetic material that we have is actually really small. We get, about 750 meg from each of our parents, and that's all the genetic material we have. And so it's very little, right? It's like a fancy photo that we take on a computer these days. It's about that size in memory that actually creates all of us, right? And so most of us is actually created through experience, not through the genetics. And so we could really use our brain to become whatever we want. And it's really easy, use it or lose it. So if you want to be good at something, you just got to do it lots and you'll actually become better at it. I mean, there are some things that, I'd never become a professional basketballer because I'm only 5'11", right? Yeah. There is restrictions in relation to, physical attributes. But as far as your brain's concerned, you really can turn it into whatever you want to turn it into. And I have a very good friend who's an amazing artist, You talk to him and he used to get in trouble at school all the time because he was always doodling, right? And that's how he became a famous artist, right? Is because he constantly drew and ignored everything else that was going on around him. And he became an amazing artist. But that's because he did it a lot. And it's what I always, when I work with schools and so on, I'm always telling the kids, you just got to do it a lot. Whatever you want to do, whatever you want to be good at, you just got to do it a lot and you will become extremely good at it. You've just got to keep practicing it.
Yeah, that's quite amazing to me that you're essentially born as a blank canvas, and the kind of let's call it memory, so to speak, or the cognitive function from your parents. You're only inheriting a tiny slice of that. So does that mean that? And this is something that I've always wondered. There are certain individuals when I went to school that were from what I could see, just naturally bright people. Were intelligent academically. They were good at maths, good at English, good at chemistry. Are people born smart, or do they learn to be smart?
Yeah, great question. It seems as though we're actually learned to be smart, not that we're actually born smart. Though we all have the potential. It's just what you get taught when you're young, and your IQ is directly correlated with how much your parents read to you when you're a kid. So if before you go to school, your parents read to you regularly, you'll start at school a year or two ahead of all the other kids who weren't read to. So just the amount of information the kids are actually given when they're younger actually impacts how intelligent they become later on. And we know our IQ changes constantly. So just during your teen years, your IQ can change by up to what we call 15 basis points. So you can go from being an average 100 to 115, which is well above average, or you can go from 100 to well below average, or go from above average to genius level just during your teen years, based on what you do and you don't do. So this idea of your IQ being something that's set by your genetics is complete nonsense. We used to think that, right? We used to think that it was all based on that, but that's because the IQ test actually came about originally because they used the IQ test to prove that certain races weren't intelligent as other races. And that's why they developed the IQ test, was actually to prove that, right? And so what they were trying to do is say you're born with certain abilities, and that's why certain people end up being having lots of money, and other people end up having working as shoe cleaners or whatever. And so that's where it came from, but it's not true. And our brains are constantly changing it based on what we do all the time. And even during adult life, you can change your IQ by an exorbitant amount if you want to, just based on your experiences and what you actually learn.
So how could you go
Which is
about
pretty cool for someone like me.
Yeah. How could you go about increasing those IQ points when you're younger, but also when you're an adult?
Yeah, it's some really cool things. So we now know there's a Harvard study that recently came out that's been going for 75 years, and they've been studying these people, for hundreds of thousands of people for all this time. And they showed the number one way to have a higher IQ, to decrease the likelihood of mental health issues, to decrease the likelihood of getting Alzheimer's disease and so on later on in life, to increase your lifespan by 10 to 15 years, to improve your cardiovascular system and make you actually healthier, is actually just to sit down with someone you trust on a regular basis and chat to them face to face. And that's the number one way of actually doing all of those things. So if you want to actually have a healthier body, better cardiovascular system, live longer, be more intelligent, is just to sit down and chat with someone. Because sitting down and talking to someone is actually a really complex thing to do, because we're not just talking to them, right? We're reading their facial expressions, we're reading their body language, we're understanding what they're actually saying and the prosody of their voice and all those things, and also trying to get meaning out of what they're saying and understanding the emotion and the empathizing with them, and so we can respond to them, and then thinking of how to actually respond to them, because again, complex language like we use now has only been around for about 150,000 years. So again, our brains, haven't really got the capacity to do that in a really easy way. So it takes all of our attention to do that. So you've got to really attend closely to them. So more of your brain is active, and you're actually exercising more of your brain if you're sitting down and chatting with someone face to face, than anything else you can do. And it's actually the best thing we can actually do for ourselves, is just sit down face to face and chat with someone. Another one is play. Play is really important. And we're the only species in the world that continues to play as we become adults. So most other animals will play when they're younger. They actually learn different behaviors, but then they lose that ability later on. We're the only ones that continue to play. And we should do more of that. And that's really important. Really, really important for young kids, but it's really important throughout our lives. And you see older people that continue to play and do fun stuff and laugh a lot, they're the ones that live longer and have healthier lives and are less likely to have neurodegenerative disease and stuff. So, it's really easy. You just sit down and chat with people you like, and you go out and have fun occasionally.
Yeah. And Is there, I know that when it comes to conversations, especially for a lot of men, including myself, I can really struggle in terms of sitting down with one of the lads and chatting about my feelings and all that kind of stuff. Whereas my girlfriend or, females in general seem to be that little bit better at it, at chatting about their feelings, at chatting about, how they're interpreting things. Is there a difference physically between the brain of a woman and the brain of a man that allows them to do that? Or is it just what they've practiced?
Yeah. So no, there's actually no evidence that there's any difference between a male brain and a female brain. All of those books out there about female brain and male brain, complete nonsense, based on really quite dodgy research.
Mm.
There's several huge meta-analyses which will look at the thousands of studies and show that there's no difference between male brain and female brain. It's what we're taught, right? It's what we actually learn. So from a very young age, we're taught that boys should be out there playing footy, and hanging out with each other and being rough with each other and not showing their emotions. And if we cry, then we're told not to cry. And and females are told from a very young age that you should be sitting around and talking to each other, and it's really important to show your emotions, and it's really important. And so we both learn that, right? And that's what we've learned, and it's been drummed into us. It's drummed into us at school, where boys are put into uniforms that allow them to play, and so therefore they're more likely to go on and actually do sport and those things. Females are put into skirts and stuff where it's much harder for them to play, and therefore it's much harder for them to do sport at lunchtime and so on. So they're much less likely to go and do sport later on, and so they're more likely to sit around and chat to each other, where boys at lunchtime are more likely to go out and actually do the playing and all the rest of it, which is what we should be doing in primary school and in high school, because it's really important for us. And so all of those things combined to mean that men have learned to shut up and to just look and to not actually open up about our emotions and not to actually talk. And females have learned that it's good, that you should be doing it, and you should do it a lot, and you should do it all the time. And so they've got all those areas of the brain. They're much, much stronger. But both of us could do that. We just got to be taught to do it from a young age.
Yeah, I was watching a movie last night. I was kind of doing my research while watching a movie, and it was actually my girlfriend picked it. It was a really interesting movie. Have you seen it? It's called A Beautiful Mind.
Oh yes, yeah, it's fantastic
and unbelievable. And as I was watching this movie, I was thinking, I wonder if these kind of what is causing these kind of delusions within the brain. What do you think causes, I suppose, would that be schizophrenia that he had?
Yeah, I would assume he had schizophrenia. But I mean, illusions are really fascinating because really we're all constantly having illusions, right? All of our perceptions are really an illusion. So when I talk, my voice box moves, which causes a wave that goes through the air, and then it pushes on your eardrum, which moves through little bones, which moves another little membrane, which moves your cochlea and pushes little hair cells up against the tympanic membrane and causes activity going into your brain. And then your brain creates an illusion that you've heard a sound. But no sound comes out of my mouth, right? Only an airwave comes out of my mouth. And an airwave isn't actually sound. And there are no sounds in the world. We're creating all these illusions that we're hearing sounds based on the movement of our eardrum. But there aren't sounds. There are only movements of air in the world. And so we're constantly having illusions. All of our perceptions are illusions. There's no color in the world. Color's an illusion that we create because we needed to pick fruit. And so we needed to see when fruit ripened, and when fruit ripens, it changes color. And so we see different spatial frequencies of light that are being reflected off different surfaces. But a spatial frequency of light is not a color in itself. It's just spatial frequency of light. So surfaces don't actually have color in their own right. We create an illusion that we're seeing colors so that we'd actually see when fruit ripens. And so, smells are the same, touch is the same, and so on, right? At the moment, you don't feel what's the surface of the back of your chair. To actually feel what the surface feels like, you've actually got to move your fingers over it because that then activates different neurons, and then you create an illusion of what the surface actually feels like. But you don't actually feel the surface, you feel it as you move across. So all of our perceptions are illusions, and we only really call them illusions when what we're perceiving doesn't match with what somebody else is perceiving. So if the majority of people are perceiving something, then we don't call it an illusion. Yeah. But they are actually all illusions. And so we're all having illusions all the time. And, a great example, when we sleep, right? You sleep and you dream, and then you don't really know whether or not you're awake or you're asleep, because it's exactly the same as a real perception, right? Is what you're perceiving in the real world, because it actually is. There's no difference between you being in a dream and you being in the real world, because they're all illusions based on the activity of different neurons in your brain.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just freaked you out a bit.
That is, I was thinking, that's fascinating. So essentially, all of us are constantly living a shared illusion.
Yeah.
And that's why we're not, typically, no one would categorize us as not right in the head, because we're all sharing the same illusion. Yeah.
But it is an illusion. And that's why we always have difficulty, right? Because you can get two people to listen to exactly the same speech by somebody, and they'll actually then tell you about that speech differently, because of the fact that we don't perceive it as it actually is. We perceive it as the illusion that we're actually creating. And that illusion that we create is based not only on what the input is, but also on all our memories in our brain. And so they'll actually perceive that thing as different based on whether or not they're connected with that person or not. So if you vote for a particular person, then you'll hear what they say differently to someone you don't vote for. Students will hear what teachers say in the classroom differently based on whether they're connected with the teacher or they're not connected with the teacher. So a teacher, if you like the teacher and you think the teacher actually likes you and you have a good relationship with them, and they say something negative, then you see it as them trying to help you get better. Whereas if you don't like the teacher and they say something negative or correct you, then you'll see that as something negative and they're being mean to you. And you'll actually hear that stuff differently as well. So we know that if you're part of someone's in-group, they find you more attractive. They're more likely to believe what you say. They're more likely to hear the positive things you say and not the negative things. You actually perceive their facial expressions differently based on what they actually say, and their body language as well. So we're not only, perceiving these illusions jointly, but we're also perceiving them based on all of our previous memories, which is pretty cool, because we can change them, right? And that's why, you have these people who you hang around with and they always make you feel happy, right? And they can tell you stuff that you wouldn't take from someone else, but if they tell you, it's okay, because of the fact of the way you're perceiving what they're actually saying. Whereas if someone else said it to you, you'd probably want to snot them, right?
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. So it's kind of based on the relationship with that person, is how you perceive what they would say. So if you were to go into a business and educate a manager on how to effectively manage the team, what would you tell them to do to build that rapport with people in order for them to, I suppose, respect what they're saying a little bit more?
Yeah, number one is you've got to get to know them. And this is a big problem in organizations, especially now, because everyone's on their phones all the time and no one actually gets to know anybody, right? Everybody, assumes they know everybody. And so the first thing is to actually get to know who the people are. And when I work with an organization, the first thing I do with the leaders that I'm actually going to work with is take them for a walk around the organization and ask them about the people. And you find most of them don't actually know who the person is, or if they're married or if they're not married, or right. 40 years ago, they would have all known that, because they actually would have spent time together and they would have actually associated with them. And it was really important in organizations to do that. Now we don't do that at all, or very little in most organizations. So first thing is you've got to actually know the person, and the person actually has to believe in what you're doing, because to be a real leader, you've got to have followers, right? A leader can't actually just be told, you're managing all these people, you're the leader of this group, right? That doesn't actually work. Those people actually have to be willing to follow you. So you need to get to know them so they feel part of your group, but also they need to then know what you're about, right? Who you are, who you really are, not just, I'm towing the party line and I'm doing what the organization tells me, right? But who you are and where you want to go and what you want to build, and finding out what your people want, what their dreams are and what they want to be, so that they can actually be part of that organization, and you can actually help them do that. And mentoring people is really important.
It's something that struggled with within business is the management of people. I think that because I'm quite I would consider myself maybe more of an introvert. I like working alone. I hate people getting in the way of my tasks. So I struggle to delegate because I feel like I can just do it.
Yeah.
And I find it difficult to toe the line between someone respecting me, but also going past that line where they maybe see a side of a manager that they shouldn't, if that makes sense. You know, if you're going out for a team dinner, maybe the manager will have one drink, but then you'll go. Whereas if you pass that line and they see you maybe drunk, maybe they won't respect you anymore. So I suppose, how would you toe that line with people within a business?
Yeah, no, that's really important. And I would say go out for coffee, not for a drink, because going out for coffee is a lot safer than going out for a drink. And I know I live in Australia, and that's not seen as very appropriate. You should be going out for a drink rather than a coffee. But I think it's at this day and age, it's a lot safer to go out for coffee, and especially in a coffee with a couple of people rather than just one on one. But for obvious reasons, especially as males, right? We've got to be careful. But yeah, you don't want to cross that line, and I think we all know where that line is. And you want to be careful of not jumping over that line where all of a sudden you become someone who's not respected, right? You do want to be friends with the person. You do want them to actually like you, right? Because then they'll actually follow you, and then they'll actually do what you want. And also, you were talking about delegating work. I think it's really important to realize that you're helping them, and as a manager, your role is to really build them up. And by delegating them work, even if it does take them longer than it will you're giving them something, right? You're giving them the ability to learn something new, or to be involved in something, or to actually, and so that is actually going to bring them into your group. That's actually going to make them, I mean, it sounds funny, you give them more work and they're actually going to like you more, but it is the case because they're actually, learning something new, as long as it's something fun, right? As long as it's something worthwhile you're giving them. I think it's really important to know that, and it pays off in spades later on. I have so many students now that I'm still in contact with who did PhDs with me or worked with me with RAs and all these things. And I spent a lot of time teaching them and guiding them and giving them, delegating them work and building them up. But now they're off doing amazing stuff elsewhere, and they'll get in touch with me and say, hey, this is happening. Would you like to be involved? Whatever. You know what I mean? Like it does pay off in spades later on when we actually do treat people with respect and help them, mentor them to become better at whatever they want to become better at, so that they can go on to do wonderful things, and then they start raising you up by actually helping you.
Yeah. Is there a limit on how many people you can have connections with at the one time? Because there's this thing within, I know that within business that is, I think it's 100 people. As soon as you get over 100 people, the business all of a sudden, because it gets a lot harder to manage because you physically can't have connections with all these people at the one time. It's your brain just can't, it doesn't work. So what is, I suppose, the limit of how many people you can actually have legitimate, close friendships with?
Yeah, it depends on the relationship. So if it's a day-to-day work, then you're probably only talking a handful of people, right? If it's the stuff that you're doing every day and you're actually trying to get stuff done and collaborate and be innovative and those sorts of things, you're probably only talking about one, handful, maybe 10 people that you can actually do that with on an intimate basis, right? But then if you're talking about how many different groups can you be a leader of, then that's probably unlimited, right? And probably only limited by the people at the next level down from you. So if you've got a great way of actually managing the next level down, and then they're able to then manage the next level down and have all those groups, but you're not going to have direct access to them all the time. It's going to be occasionally. But also, like I was saying, I have huge number of ex-PhD students, ex-postdocs, ex-RAs who are now all over the world doing different amazing things. And some of those I won't see for 2 or 3, 4 years. And then all of a sudden I'll run into them at a conference, or I'll run into them, at a meeting or whatever. And it's like yesterday, right? And I'm sure you've got people like that in your life. And so those people aren't part of that group either, right? But there's still people you're connected with and people you have relationships, and people I could email tomorrow and they would, email me back and go, yeah, no problem. I'll do, whatever I ask, well, within reason, whatever I ask them to do. So I don't think we can put a number on it. I think these days, because of TikTok and stuff, everybody wants a number. It's 100 or it's 40 hours and you'll become a master or whatever. But I don't think there is any one number. And I think some people do it better than others. But also, it depends on the relationship and what level the relationship is, and how long the relationship. I have friends that I've known for decades, who I don't see very often, but they'd bend over backwards for me. I know, and I bend over backwards for them if they got in touch. But so it's one of those how long's a piece of string question. Sorry.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Very long. I could have just said that at the start, couldn't I? And then
No. Listen, it's a podcast. It's long form. That's what it is. Well, I suppose to your point, how long is a piece of string? I suppose it all depends as well on how good your kind of cognitive memory is, because you know, in order to get to know people, you do need to remember things about them. What's their daughter called? What's their husband called? What's their name? How would you improve your brain's memory?
Oh, great question. You've got to be practicing with your memory. So there's lots of little tricks, mnemonics, having the whole, having a different letter for different things, and those, and they work for tricks, but they don't work long term. So if you want to remember, if you're walking into a room, and it's an opportunity to meet a bunch of new people, then you could use tricks like, when you hear their name, you look at something on their body that reminds you of that first letter of their name, and all those sorts of things that people use, or, go around your body and remember based on where you met them and so on. But that will only help you for that session, because then next time you see them, you probably won't remember as well, or you won't remember their name as well, because you're not in the same situation. If you want to get good at just a good, strong memory, it's about using it. So slowing down and actually concentrating on things, and using things like Pomodoro technique to actually exercise your attention mechanism. Because what you really need to do to get stuff into your long-term memory, you've got to hold it in what we call working memory for long enough that then gets transferred to a temporary store, and then it'll get transferred to your long-term memory when you're sleeping at night. To have it in that temporary store, you've got to be attending to it so that it goes into your working memory. So you have to have a really good attention network. And so exercising your attention network, which means slowing down, which means turning off devices and actually reading, for example, is really good for actually getting a better memory. Yeah. Reading on books, not on devices. Or playing something like chess, or playing, a board game, or these sorts of things. Again, in real space, because we know, on devices, you're not using your attention network in the same way. So doing those things is really good for extending your memory, because you've got to have a good, strong attention network to hold that information in your working memory for long enough for it to be transferred to your temporary store. But your long-term memory is infinite, so you can have as much information in there as you like. You just got to get it in there.
And you said an interesting thing there regarding when you go to sleep, that's when it's transferred to your long-term memory. What are the impacts of not sleeping or having a bad disrupted night sleep? I know that I was out on Friday, so I maybe had a disrupted night's sleep on the Friday night. What are the impacts of that in terms of not transferring memories, in terms of what's happening in the brain?
Yeah, so we do, as I said, we transfer information to this temporary store, and then we store it at night. And so your sleep is really important. And for an adult, you want to be getting somewhere between 6 hours, 8 hours during the night, because what happens is you go through 5 different stages, and the first couple are about resetting your brain and getting rid of neurotoxins and everything out of your brain so it's nice and healthy. And then you go through the REM sleep, where you're practicing what you actually did during the day, and you're practicing how you can do things better. So it's really important. It's really important for teenagers to have that period, because they're actually practicing their emotions and their social and their empathy and all these sorts of things, and their ability to do to create groups and so on. But also for adults, where we're actually practicing what happens. And so that's when all your innovation and creativity happens. It doesn't happen during the day. It happens during that REM sleep. And then you're actually putting down your memories. And what you do is you go in reverse order. So you lay down the first couple of hours of memories the first time you go into that last stage. And then you lay down the next couple of hours of memories the next time you go into that late stage, and then the next couple. So every hour you lay down a couple of hours, and then a couple of hours the next hour, and then a couple of hours the next hour. So if you have disrupted sleep, or if you only sleep for say 4 hours, then you'll miss the first bunch of things that you learned during the day, basically.
Wow. Okay, that's super interesting.
So what you want to do is, if there's stuff you really need to remember, is to read notes on it just before you go to sleep, and then go to sleep, because then it'll be the first stuff to be laid down in your memory. So it'll be the strongest stuff. So the stuff that you do late at night, just before you go to bed, is the stuff that you'll remember the best.
Right. Okay, I'm definitely going to use that.
Yeah, most of us, of course, watch TV or something like that, or
TikTok.
scroll on our phones. Yeah, TikTok, and that's what we remember most, which is why we're all so depressed, because we're watching this crap all the time, and that's what we're laying down in our memories, rather than the stuff that we actually need, which is the wonderful stuff that happened during the day.
Yeah. And is there a correlation between, you mentioned creativity there. I know that, I do videography and photography. That's how I built my career on that. And I know that just before I would go to sleep, I'd be lying in bed and I would wake up or kind of come to and be like, I've got a great idea for a video that involves this transition or this color grade. It's a little bit more creative. Is there a kind of link between that first light stage of sleep and creativity?
So it's not the first stage of sleep, it's your REM sleep that actually does it. So when you're in your REM sleep, which you're obviously going into that early, you actually make links between what you've been doing that day. So things that you've been doing that day, you do them in fast forward, and you do all the options that you could have actually done. Which is why this is when teenagers actually learn how to be social. So a teenager, for example, during that REM sleep will be thinking, I walked into school today and I saw so-and-so friend and I yelled out to them and they ignored me, so I ignored them. And then we had an argument later on because we're grumpy. And then they go, I walked into school today and I called out to my friend and I thought they were ignoring me. So I walked up to them and said, are you ignoring me? And they said, no, I'm not ignoring you. I didn't hear you. And we do thousands of scenarios based on things that we've done that day. So if you're a videographer and you're trying to come up with a good way of doing something, then you'll be going through thousands of different scenarios as to how you can actually do that, all based on your long-term memory. So stuff you've done before, but also links to other things you've done and everything else. And you do that in fast forward. So you do those scenarios in fast forward. So you get through thousands of them every night based on the stuff that you're trying to work on. And so any innovative, creative idea you come up with during the day, you actually probably thought about it the night before or several nights before, or a week before or whatever in your sleep. And then you actually go, it comes to your working memory, because it's all in your long-term memory. And that's why we have those light bulb moments. And in actual fact, Edison, who famously stole the light bulb idea, but he did come up with a huge number of inventions. And he used to have a couch in his office, and when he had no good ideas, he used to have a bunch of ball bearings and a big fry pan. He put the fry pan next to his couch, and then he put a whole bunch of big ball bearings in his hand, and he'd sit down on his couch and fall asleep. And when we go into this REM sleep, we actually, all of our muscles relax. So his hand would relax and he'd drop the ball bearings and they'd drop into the saucepan and they'd wake him up. And that's when he came up with all supposedly he came up with all his inventions while he was asleep on his couch, and then he'd wake up and remember, because we often don't remember it straight away, right? And Einstein again said, all of his great ideas came from when he was in REM sleep and he woke up and went, that's this or whatever. But if you talk to any of the great inventors or the great scientists, they'll all say it all came, during that REM sleep.
Wow, it just kind of shows you the power of the human mind, that it can virtually be unconscious, but it's still figuring things out and firing out neurons and opening up other possibilities of what could have happened within the day.
Yeah, and that's what we used to be told, right? If you're having an issue at work or you're having, you can't think of the solution, then just sleep on it. And it actually worked, right? We should be sleeping on it. And we all need to be sleeping more because none of us are sleeping enough these days. But especially those teenagers, because that's when they learn a lot of important stuff that they're not learning because they're not sleeping enough. But all of us need to. We need to be we now know there's a lot of organisations. I think some countries now in Europe are actually banning companies from emailing their employees after work so that they'll sleep more because then they're more productive the next day because they're sleeping and they're coming up with all these really cool, innovative and creative ideas. So that they'll be more productive the next day because they've come up with the solutions that night, And that's great, right? We need to be leaving our employees alone so that they can work more, so that they can work more while they're sleeping.
Yeah, it's a bit like when I have let's say you have an argument with your partner or your girlfriend, or 90% of the time I'm like, listen, let's chill out a bit, let's just go to bed. When we wake up, we can figure this out. And most of the time, you wake up and you think, I don't actually know what we were arguing about. Like there was no need for it at all. It's just like an emotional kind of trigger, and then you kind of lose track of what's actually going on, and then it's just a pointless argument. But when you sleep on it, obviously that REM sleep maybe does its thing, and you kind of look at other options and why he might have been angry and why she might have been angry, and then you can kind of figure it out from there. So I think it's great advice. There's something that I wanted to ask you from a personal standpoint. I had when I was sort of putting the building blocks in with my career, my kind of USP, what I did to be unique was I used to get up very, very early for sunrise. So I would travel to these places at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, climb in Monroe for sunrise and film it. And I did this for a really, really long time. And my ex-girlfriend actually used to tell me to sleep in the spare room because she knew what I was like. So, but I had kind of I got a real endorphin rush, an adrenaline rush from getting up at that time in the morning. And it's not something that happened overnight. I think it was maybe the third or fourth time that I did this that all of a sudden I was like, it was where I got my buzz from. Is there a link that I'd made in my brain from doing this to potentially money, or is that why I maybe felt that way?
Yeah, there is some research on the importance of light, right? Because you would have been going outside at those times as well, and there is a real link between the light that we get, especially early morning light, but that natural light actually releases a whole bunch of really important neurotransmitters in our brain. So it's really important for us to get up and get outside when we first wake, and that'll actually really sets us up for a good day. Basically, it releases a whole bunch of neurotransmitters and wakes us up, because you can imagine, for millions of years, that's what we would have done, right? We would have woken up and gone outside into natural light, and that's what turned us on and made us go, yep, we're ready for the day, we're going to do whatever it is we've got to do. And so that's what our brains are actually set up to do. Rather than get up drowsy, open a computer, look at the blue light in the computer, which isn't natural light, it's actually different, and it actually affects our brain slightly differently. And so, that's probably more of what you were getting, was that natural light, which is really important for us.
I think you're right as well. I think it's something that I'm very, very, very lucky that in my job, that's kind of what I have to do. A lot of the time I need to catch the sunrise. That's the job. So I do get a lot of that natural kind of stimulant. And I suppose you're totally right. If someone's getting up and walking in their tracky bottoms and a dressing gown to their computer and getting the blue light, it's not natural. It's not stimulating the brain. And actually, I think that can make you quite depressed, not being outside. In terms of depression, mental health, there's a couple of questions here. How has firstly working from home impacted that?
Yeah, that's a bad one. It's actually really negative. So, it can be really negative if you organise your day positively. And so I work at home now a lot because I have my own company now, and what I do is I organise at least once a day to catch up with someone. And I'm lucky I live close to the beach and I have a lovely cafe just down here that they probably get sick of me. But I go down there and I meet someone and I chat with them on a regular basis. I always get up early also and walk my dog around this area, which is really important to get up and get outside. And if you do those things, it's not so bad as long as you are meeting up with people face to face and actually interacting with them, because that's really important for us as humans. If you're staying at home and you're just working on a computer and you're not getting that interaction with other people, then you can develop some pretty bad mental health issues around social anxiety and depression because you're not getting what we need, which is social interaction. And social interaction is the most important thing for us as humans, because we are the connected species, right? Our brain is developed to enable us to connect with each other. And we get a whole bunch of really important endorphins and neurotransmitters released when we actually meet up with someone face to face that we don't get online. So it's really important to do that. So if you set it up right, it can work.
Yeah, I suppose what is actually happening within the brain? Social anxiety is something that I've faced. I was on medication for it for a long time, and I think it's partially because I am maybe a little bit of an introvert. But I think looking back retrospectively, it's probably because I just kind of avoided it, and because I wasn't working the muscle, it just got worse. So what is actually happening within the brain during social anxiety or maybe more depressive episodes?
Yeah, so we get used to, with social anxiety, we get used to, well, again, as we were talking about before, anything you do a lot, you get better at, and things that you don't do, you get worse at. And so actually socializing is complex, right? It is actually a difficult thing to do. And so if you're not doing it a lot, then you get used to not doing a lot. And our brain is always looking, well, not looking, it is trying to keep you in homeostasis, so keep you at where you're at. And so if you're not socializing much, then your brain will be telling you don't want to socialize much. And that's really what happened during COVID in a lot of places, is we're all told to socially isolate and stay away from everyone. And that's what we got used to, and that's what our brains got used to. And then all of a sudden, when we're told it's okay to actually socialize, a lot of people then had really bad social anxiety associated with that, because they weren't used to actually doing that, actually socializing. And it does trigger a lot of emotions and a lot of things in the brain, which is bad. But the problem is that we need to do it, because our brains are designed to actually socialize. And so we need to actually socialize, because you get a whole bunch of really important neurotransmitters and endorphins when you do socialize. So yeah, it's important to do it, but it can be hard for some people. And usually you'll find it's hard with people who have avoided it, as you rightly said, you've avoided it for a while, and then it becomes worse and worse and worse. And usually it's because of something else that's happened that they start avoiding it, and then they avoid it from then on, and then it becomes much harder for them to do it.
I think that, and this is something that I've been told from friends, I think, and it's not a bad thing, by the way, I think everyone's very, very different. And everyone, to a certain degree, might be on the spectrum to a greater or lesser extent. I think I have a kind of sprinkle of autism, I believe, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But it makes me an extremely detailed person. I can really hyper focus on things. As an editor, it's a very intense thing. It's a bit like coding in a lot of ways. Is there a difference between people that are autistic and socializing because they don't really want that contact as much?
Yeah, it's not that they don't want the contact; it's that they get overstimulated by the contact. So they have hyperstimulation when they're actually in those environments. So as I was saying, they are difficult situations for all of us, and so we've got to be aware of that. And they often get hyper stimulated by that environment, and so therefore they have more difficulty in that environment. But it's not that they don't want to. I remember many years ago I worked at a place called Knott Street, which was for high functioning teenagers and adults with autism, and these guys were geniuses, right? These were off the spectrum when it comes to their IQs, but they often had trouble holding down a job because of the social stuff associated with holding down a job. But most of the stuff we worked on them with was around socialization. They wanted to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they wanted to be able to go to the pub and meet people, and they wanted to hold down a job where they could, but the cues, they have trouble with the cues associated with, because as I said, it's really complex, right? The prosody of the voice, and you've got the body language cues, and you've got facial expression cues, and you've got the subtle cues. You've got those, all those things are really difficult to read for someone with autism, and so they misunderstand those cues, which makes it even more difficult for them. Plus, they're hypersensitive to a lot of stimuli, so noises and lights and those things, which also makes it difficult for them. So it's not that they don't want to socialize, it's that they find it very difficult to socialize. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And is there a difference between, I know that when we talked about ADHD and dyslexia, you were saying there's not actually really much or any of a difference within the brain. It's more about how the brain is wired, so to speak. Is that the same with someone with autism?
There does seem to be some. It's been fairly inconsistent. There has been some studies showing that there's a difference in the brain, a slight difference in the brain between individuals with autism, but then there's been other studies that have shown no, there's not a difference between autism, and it depends on the diagnosis that you use. Because again, autism, like ADHD, the diagnosis is all based on behaviour rather than, you can't have a genetic test or anything like that. So. It depends on the diagnosis, and there does seem to be some, but it's fairly controversial as to whether or not there is a difference in the brains of individuals with autism. But they do really seem to have this a difference in their sensory perception and how they're receiving that information.
Interesting. And on the subject of kind of more neurodivergent people, have you heard of low latent inhibition?
No, I haven't.
So
is that rare? That must be a rare one. There's not many I haven't heard of.
Very, very rare. It's super, super interesting. You should look it up. It's essentially people. If you have 5 blocks in front of you, people with ADHD like me will kind of jump from block to block, and they won't be able to focus on the singular block. Whereas if you have someone with low latent inhibition, they're focusing on all 5 blocks at the one time constantly. Now, most of the time, that will result in serious issues because it's too much stimulus for someone to take in. But on the rare occasion, someone with an extremely high IQ that has low latent inhibition, because they're focusing on everything at the one time, it almost always results in like a genius, like a creative, brilliant genius. And I was thinking potentially of someone like Elon Musk. He might have, he's putting together engines. He knows all the components to his rocket ships. He's putting together cars. He's got several businesses. He probably has a degree, as well as autism, by the way, because he's autistic, of low latent inhibition, because he sees everything. His eyes are everywhere all the time, which is amazing, but also I think can come at a cost. I mean, if you think of how much stimulus you're really taking in at that point. But it's a super, super interesting subject. It's something that I kind of, as I was doing my research, I stumbled upon, and I was kind of super, super interested in it.
No, I'll have to have a look. I haven't heard of that one before, but yeah, there's some really rare but really interesting disorders out there. I actually studied a guy once. He had it was a type of simultaneous agnosia where he only saw snapshots of the world. So he didn't see things moving. And so he would just see the world as a snapshot. So which meant that he had amazing recall, because he would see, you could flash up 20 objects to him and he'd be able to recall them all, whereas we can only recall about 3 or 4 of them because of the fact that we don't see, snap it up and it goes away. But his perception of it would stay. And so he had this amazing recall for information. But it was very difficult because, crossing the road and so on, he'd see cars there and then all of a sudden they'd be right in front of him because he just saw these snapshots rather than seeing a continuous version of the world, which is pretty crazy.
Wow. And I suppose that photographic memories, is that real?
There hasn't been any documented evidence of a photographic memory. There are people who, so they did it originally. They looked at chess players, and there was a couple of chess players that they thought had photographic memories because when they showed them the chess pieces in different orders, they'd remember it all, exactly the way it was, whereas a normal person couldn't do that. But then they realized what they were doing was that the chess players in their studies, they study all the different moves and the way you can win and all the rest of it. And what they were doing was they were remembering one of the moves, because you'd end up in this position with these pieces in these positions. So if you actually like put other pieces down or put it in a position where pieces couldn't end up, then they can't actually remember it. So they don't actually have photographic memory. They've just remembered thousands and thousands of different chess games and how to win chess, and therefore can remember where the pieces are based on those chess games that they remember.
So there's not really been the evidence to support that people or anyone can have a photographic memory, so to speak.
No.
Got you. No, that makes sense. It's I suppose yeah. So it's just people that have super intellectual that can kind of claim that they've got a photographic memory just because they can remember a lot of stuff.
Yeah, they either remember a lot of stuff or they use, different mnemonics. I can never say that word very well, but yeah, they'll use tricks to actually remember it. But if you present them with objects that you can't name and you can't put labels on and all those sorts of things so that they can't use any of those tricks, then they usually fall down. They fall down pretty quickly.
Yeah. Have you, my ex-girlfriend did a study in university on the effects of blueberries on brain health and the cognitive functions that blueberries, because of the antioxidants, did to the brain. And I'm going to butcher the stats, so I'm not going to go into the stats, but it's super interesting. Apparently, and please don't quote me, anyone listening to this, because I will butcher this, but I think it was like it's either a 3 or 7% uplift in cognitive ability if you're eating blueberries due to the antioxidants and all the amazing chemicals that these plants have in them. There's several studies, I'll link them below in the podcast, but it kind of leads me to the question of how can I maintain a healthy brain?
Yeah, beautiful question. So I'll go through the simple ways. The simple ways are drinking enough water or fluids. Yeah. So dehydration is really bad for your brain. So don't get dehydrated, and drink enough fluid because you need fluid to have blood supply and all the rest of it. Staying physically healthy as well, because again, you need a good blood supply and you need a good oxygen supply. Our brain's only 2% of the weight of our body, but it uses 25% of the energy that we actually consume.
Wow.
So it is really high energy, and it gets that through the blood supply. So having a healthy cardiovascular system is really important. Sleep is really important because it goes through that detox each night and actually gets rid of the bad neurotransmitters and any toxins and all the rest of it. So sleeping for at least 6 to 8 hours is really important. And then doing food is also good. So healthy food and a range of healthy food, which I'll get back to in a minute because it's a really, really interesting one. And then the last one is having people that you trust, that you chat with on a regular basis. It is amazing for your brain and really, really good for your brain. And actually doing that, sitting down and chatting with people you trust on a regular basis is really important. So those are the 5 main ones that we talk about when we talk about brain health. What's really interesting is I remember about 20 years ago, I was asked to do a keynote at a psychiatrist conference. And I went and did the keynote and I was talking about a lot of the neuroimaging work that I was doing. And then I decided to hang around afterwards because I wanted to hear what everyone else was doing and all the rest of it. And the whole session after me, which was amazing, and it was really early on in this, was looking at gut health and the impact of gut health on your brain and the impact of gut health on mental health and on anxiety and on depression and on all these things. And it's amazing the interaction between your gut health and the way your brain works. And it goes back to the blueberries thing, that it seems to be that your gut flora, so the microbiomes and everything in your gut actually have a huge impact on how our brain works, and how healthy our brain is and how intelligent we are, and helps us be resilient to mental health issues and all these sorts of things. And just changing your gut health, I think some of the studies are showing, within 2 or 3 weeks of changing the flora in your gut, the microbiomes and everything in your gut, can improve depression and anxiety and all these mental health issues that we're really concerned about, and improve your intelligence levels. So that's also a really important one to consider. And that comes down to, fresh fruit and vegetables, and having a lot of fiber in your diet seems to be one of the ones that really has a big impact on the gut health, and one that we don't get enough of today with processed foods and so on. So that's one you really need to think about. Nuts and legumes and all that sort of stuff is really good for that.
And do you think people, because of the diets today, just thinking of like, my friends, if maybe they've had a drink and they're a little bit hungover, all of a sudden a Deliveroo is a great idea and they're ordering a McDonald's from Deliveroo, all of a sudden that becomes the norm because it's a really easy thing to do. And, why wouldn't you? Because it's healthy. It's not healthy. It's quick, it's fast, it's cheap. But yeah, it's not healthy. So do you think there's been a decline in cognitive function because of people's diets that aren't great anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's huge impact on both our intellect and our mental health. And there's a spiral, right? You feel crap, and so you order takeaway, and that gives you a little boost of dopamine. But then because of the sugar and the fat in it, but then that goes very quickly, and so you feel crap again. So you order some more crappy food, and then you eat it, and then it does the same thing, and so you order more of it, and you feel worse and worse and worse, and so you keep ordering it because it gives you that high and then the decrease. I mean, it's the same as any addiction, right? It's the same as gambling or alcohol addiction or drug addiction or gaming addiction. All these things are because you get this hit of dopamine, and then it goes really quickly, and so you want more of it, and you want that quick release that you get from the dopamine. But it's not sustaining. And so we need to start thinking about things that are sustaining. And that's why we need to eat healthy food, because it doesn't give you the dopamine hit. It just makes you feel better over a longer period of time.
That's a really interesting one. There's a couple of questions that arise from there. I think thinking personally, looking at my Deliveroo orders, and this is something when I was doing my research last night, I actually did. So I go through patterns, and it's so funny because they know that I go through patterns and they mark it to me and text me based on those patterns. So when it comes into winter, and that's my peak season, so like I'm working a lot during winter, and I'm in the office, I'll order Deliveroos to the office because I genuinely just don't have the time for food. And then because I'm ordering Deliveroos to the office, at the weekend, I'll be like, well, I have no food in the house, so I'll keep ordering Deliveroos. And it just keeps on going and keeps on going. What is the role of dopamine in like cognitive memory in the brain?
Yeah, so dopamine is it's involved in our formation of our habits or our addiction. So habits and addictions are really the same thing. The difference between a habit and addiction, the only difference between a habit and addiction is an addiction is something that causes you grief, whereas a habit is something that you're doing, and it's usually not causing grief. So, and what happens is you have a cue that sets off your behavior or your thought, and then you get a release of dopamine from that behavior or thought, which then increases the likelihood of you remembering that cue and that behavior. So it gets stronger. So it's more likely to happen. So it reinforces it. So you get this little loop going, and then you get that cue again, and you'll do that behavioral thought again, and then it'll make it stronger because of that dopamine. So dopamine makes you feel, I don't like to say happy, because serotonin and oxytocin is also involved in you feeling happy, but they're better neurotransmitters for feeling happy because they're longer lasting and they're better for us. But the dopamine is a quick release, so it just makes you feel happy temporarily. But it's what it also activates your hippocampus, which makes you more likely to remember that cue and the behavior. And so that's why we're more likely to get addicted to it. Yeah. And so that's why, and we remember the things that make us feel good, which is why, we can get addicted to alcohol, and we can get addicted to drugs, and we can get addicted to fat, we get addicted to sugar. And so that's why all of these things, end up getting us addicted. And these things were good for us many years ago when we didn't have access to a lot of food, because they were high in calories, and we needed things that were high in calories. And so that's why we get addicted. But now, of course, they're available at the end of your phone constantly. And so that's why they release the dopamine so we remember it, so that we'll eat it. But again, we're using a brain that evolved millions of years ago and hasn't really changed in the last couple of 100,000 years. But we have access to these things too readily now, which is why it really scares me, because if you get addicted, and this has pretty much been the theme of this whole chat, right? If you do one thing a lot, then you do it more and more. You want to do it more and more and more, right? And your brain gets used to it, and so you keep doing it. And so if you get into addiction cycles, then you're more likely to get addicted to other things. And we know that if you get addicted to something like food or gaming or social media, then you're more likely to get addicted to other things, because you want a bigger hit of dopamine each time. And so you're then more likely to get addicted to alcohol or to drugs or to gambling or to other things that will give you a bigger high each time. And so we need to be really careful, because kids are eating this food, and then they're getting addicted to it, and then they're more likely to get addicted to worse things later on. Or they're gaming, and they're more likely to get addicted to worse things later on. Or they're doing social media, and they're more likely to get addicted to other things later on. And so we call them gateway drugs. They're gateway drugs to these worse things. And so it really scares me, because we've got in this country anyway, we've got a huge increase in gambling, online gambling, in the 15 to 25-year-old group, right? Because of the fact that prior to that, they were getting addicted to social media and getting addicted to gaming, and now they're getting addicted to gambling, which of course leads on to alcohol and drug addiction, which isn't great.
That's super scary. So almost the one addiction can snowball quicker into another, and the more addictions you pick up, it becomes almost like a bigger snowball, right? And it's going faster. I think something that pops into my mind when I think of addiction is vaping. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's as big in Australia, but in the UK, I mean, you see kids at 12 years old with a purple highlighter looking, little thing, and just puffing it constantly. So do you think the fallout effect from vaping will actually be so much worse due to the fact that they're going to go on to another addiction after the fact of vaping?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why the tobacco industry's got into vaping, right?
Yeah.
Because the next step is tobacco, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It's like, it's not brain science there. It's like pretty obvious what they're doing. And yeah, it's a huge problem here in schools, right? In the toilets and everything, they're all sitting in the toilets vaping, because it's easier to vape now than it is to smoke the old cigarettes, because the smoke's not there anymore. So yeah, absolutely, and that's a big problem. But we've also got an even bigger problem, which is gamifying, right? Educational technology companies are gamifying all their programs and selling them to schools, and schools are using these programs which are gamified. And gamifying is using intermittent reinforcement to get kids addicted to what they're actually using. So gamifying is causing addiction in kids to these educational platforms, which will make them more susceptible to addiction to other things later on. And that's in all our schools.
That is so scary. See, especially as I'm 26 now. So I reckon, maybe 5-10 years time, kids will be on the horizon or there. And for me to send my child into school knowing that they're gamifying things in order to get kids addicted, which will actually increase the likelihood of them getting addicted to the, whatever is next, is that's terrifying. Something that you said that was really interesting there, I'll rewind a little bit, is you said that serotonin is actually a better chemical for your brain. And I was thinking of, a lot of my friends used to go to festivals, and a lot of them used to take certain drugs, MDMA, ecstasy, and these drugs release serotonin within the brain. what are what's the fallout of taking, let's say, MDMA or ecstasy on the brain? Because if serotonin is a good chemical, but is it just released in far too great a scale at that point?
Yeah. So what you end up doing is, because our brain is always looking to like keep everything steady at a steady rate, and so if you've got a lot of dopamine, then that's its new reset point, right? And that's what it's hoping for all the time, and which is why we get addicted, and then we want more, and that's the new reset. And the same with serotonin. If you're taking MDMA or whatever, then the amount of serotonin you're getting in your brain is much higher, and so it sees that as now the reset point. And when you just get the normal level of serotonin, which is down here, it basically doesn't feel it. It's not enough, and it needs more. And so that's why you end up getting addicted to things like MDMA or any of those drugs, whether or not they're serotonin or dopamine. Different ones activate different types of neurotransmitters, or are working on different neurotransmitter systems. But that's the problem, is that you're resetting your brain at a higher level, and therefore it'll then start expecting that level. And then when it's getting the normal level again, it doesn't see that as normal. It's wanting more. And that's why you don't. And that's why when you go on those drugs, I used to take those drugs myself, the next day you feel shit, right? Once it wears off, you feel really crap. And there's not much you can do to actually feel better, because your brain is reset at that higher. And so you can't get that higher, and it takes a while for it to reset back down. But if you take it again, then it's back there, and then you take it again and again, and it'll slowly, that'll be the normal point rather than the lower point, which we wanted at.
Is there any positives too? I know that they're using MDMA therapy is becoming a thing quite quickly, especially amongst those with maybe PTSD or things that they can't talk about, depression, more anxious people. So is there any positives to MDMA or ecstasy?
Yeah, it's hard to know. The research is very, very new. I have a very good friend who works on hallucinogenics and whether or not hallucinogenics are actually any good for increasing productivity and microdosing and all those sorts of things. He hasn't found any evidence that it actually works. But I mean, he's only one researcher in multiple that are working in this area. I think it's a very new area, and it's a big unknown at the moment. I think we be careful. It's the microdosing and some of those have actually become legal for clinical groups here in Australia recently, and there's been a lot of controversy about it because the evidence really isn't there at the moment, to be honest. I'm not sure. It's new because we haven't been able to do research on that, because it's been illegal, right? And so therefore you haven't been able to do research on it. It's only just recently that we've been able to do research. So the research is really new, and there's not enough to actually work out whether or not it's good, bad, or somewhere in between.
I think that kind of relates back to social media. I think people curate their algorithms to be almost like a mirrored room. So their views get reflected back at them. So let's say they have an addiction or a mental addiction to weed. They smoke weed and they say, well, actually, weed makes me concentrate more. They'll curate their algorithm to tell them that that's true, even though the research might not necessarily point that way, or there might be different studies that are saying actually it's negative. They'll curate their own algorithm to reinforce what they want to feel because they don't want anyone telling them that they're wrong.
Yeah. There's some great research now showing that we actually have access to less information than we ever have in the past because of the fact that the algorithms that run in the background bias all the information that we get. So we only get information that actually confirms our biases. And so we're not actually getting, a lot of people go, oh, we've got access to the world now, and students should be allowed to be on devices so that they can, search the world. But in actual fact, we have access to less information because of those algorithms and because of the biases and because it always confirms what we want it to confirm so that we'll keep watching, because that's the only point, right? The only point of any of these platforms is to keep us looking so that they can make more money out of our time and wasting our time. And so they'll always feed us information that confirms what we think is right, or what we want to be right, rather than what is actually out there and we actually need to know about. which is a bit scary because we're all becoming more insular.
Exactly. It's absolutely terrifying because you're reiterating people's beliefs. You're making people more socially anxious, so they don't want to talk to anyone or debate with anyone about their beliefs. But you're also just reinforcing someone's beliefs to the point where they won't even argue about it because they feel like. I feel like in the podcast, especially, there's people that have come on with different points of view to me, but I listen to them, I hear them out, and then I think, shit, maybe I was wrong there. Whereas you have a society nowadays that is too socially anxious to actually speak to each other in order to have that conversation. And it's not saying that the person's wrong, but it's just saying that there needs to be two point of views and you need to come to a common conclusion, that you find the common ground. It's just super scary, isn't it?
It is, and then you've got the trolls out there that love to comment about stuff in a negative way, no matter what you say, right? I mean, I often get people trolling me about things I say, and it's really frustrating because it's people are just trying to shut people down rather than actually wanting to listen to people. And we need, if democratic society is all about everybody, having a say. And it's listening to each other and then deciding on what the majority of us want, not what a couple of influencers want. But at the moment, it's a couple of influencers that are having bigger impact on the messages than anyone else. And that to me is really, really scary because most of those people are in it for the money and not in it for social justice. And we need everyone to have a say so that we can get social justice occurring rather than just a couple of people who are making huge amounts of money out of our attention and our time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's another thing I was going to ask you about. This is more of a personal one, and I suppose it's related to COVID, but it's also related to the brain because of Alzheimer's. So my gran during COVID went into a old folks home and she had Alzheimer's, and I feel like because she didn't have any cognitive stimulus while in the old folks home, because we physically weren't allowed to visit her because of COVID, she rapidly deteriorated. I think it was a year before I was able to see her, and the deterioration was humongous. And I feel like it's because she didn't have anything to focus on, and she didn't have, as you say, that social interaction. What kind of is Alzheimer's in the brain, like in terms of what it's actually doing to the brain? Can you kind of define that?
Yeah, so it's basically a disease that you can get, which is killing off your neurons, and it starts off in memory areas, and then it moves to other areas as well, which is why they eventually lose ability to control their bowels and to move and to walk around and all those things. But it starts off in those memory centers and then moves out. But it's basically little. They call them tangles, but it's basically little things that are growing in the brain, and they slowly kill off all the neurons in the brain. And it really does look like little holes in the brain as it moves through the brain. And the more cognitive capacity you have, the less likely you are to get Alzheimer's. So the more you exercise your brain and the more healthy your brain is, the less likely you are to get it because you have extra capacity. It's sort of like an athlete, right? An athlete, if they hurt themselves and aren't able to exercise for a couple of weeks, then after a couple of weeks they'll come back and they'll be able to run without any problems. Whereas somebody who's never exercised and overweight and they hurt themselves, then they end up maybe bedridden for the rest of their lives because of the fact that they don't have that extra capacity. And it's the same with your brain. But we know if one person has Alzheimer's and they're married to another person, and then this person actually passes away, this person's Alzheimer's gets worse almost overnight because they don't have that other person there to actually socialize with and to actually help them, remind them of their past and remind them of all those things that are really important to them. And similarly, if one person with Alzheimer's gets put into, a nursing home or something, they do tend to deteriorate much quicker because of the fact that they don't have all that socialization and everything, which is why nursing homes nowadays do a lot of socializing with their patients and so on. But during COVID, they couldn't do that, and it would have had a big effect on a lot of individuals in those environments. But even, just people who live alone as they get older are more likely to get Alzheimer's disease if they don't socialise a lot. If they're lonely and at home by themselves, much more likely to get Alzheimer's disease, and for that to have a bigger effect on their cognitive function.
Do you think that people should retire based on that information? Because I have the quite a strong view. I mean, listen, I've got ADHD, but I think that if I didn't have my job and multiple things going on at one time, I would just freak out. I don't think I'll ever be able to stop working partially because I love what I do, but also partially because I just need something to do all the time. And I think that's healthy. I think that's good. I think we need that. We need that constant, trying to work the brain. When I do the podcast, I speak to people like yourself. It's an area that I have virtually no idea about, but you're educating me, and I find that super, super interesting. Do you think that based on the evidence, people should try their best not to retire, because as soon as they retire, they're maybe more likely to get Alzheimer's because they're not using their brain as much?
Yeah, no, it's a great. I don't know whether it's retire. I hope I never retire, to be honest, but and I can't see myself ever retiring, because I love what I do, and I hope I get to do it forever. But I don't know. I think some people, their jobs they don't like, and I think having the opportunity to stop doing that and then volunteering and doing something is awesome, right? Or stop doing that and looking after the grandkids, or stop doing that and doing. But I think if you stop, I think we need to transition people to retirement, whatever we call that, better, where we actually organise so that they go on to do something else that they love, rather than just stopping work and then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, well, now what do I do with my life, right? And then my father died very quickly after he retired, and you could see it was depression, right? And then all of a sudden he got a whole bunch of other diseases associated with, and a lot of people do, once they finish work, once they retire, they then drop off very quickly cognitively because they don't have anything else to do, and they sit in front of the TV and die, which is really sad. And so I think we need to organise other things for people to do, and have other things for them to do. And there are movements in some countries to do more of that, to have more of those things for people to do as they get older. But I think we need to do more of that. And I think volunteering is a cool way to do it. I know it's been a huge drop off in volunteers over the last 10, 15 years. And so perhaps, having people move into volunteer positions or other things that they love doing, I think it'd be a really cool thing to do. Also, we know, right, there's some great movements now to have to set up old people's homes with preschools, and so to combine the two, because you find the old people get a huge benefit out of having preschool kids in the retirement home, and the preschool kids get a huge benefit out of having these old people that they can talk to about. One of the big problems, I think, with society now is that we're all generational, right? We stay within our peer groups. There's a great book by Gabor Mate called Hold On To Your Kids, which is all about the issue around peer groups and that everybody's within their peer groups. And, if you've got kids, primary school kids who are in year one, and they're only hanging out with other year ones, then all their learning goes on amongst their peer group, right? And the other year ones don't know any more than they do. So they don't actually get to learn all the important skills and everything that they would have generations ago learnt from older people and older generations. And within schools, we need to actually be letting kids interact across year groups rather than keeping them within their year groups, but also older generations actually hanging out with younger generations so that they actually learn respect and they learn how to do things and they learn all those important skills that we used to learn from our older people, but we don't anymore because we are so separated from them now, which is really sad. So I think, a lot of that stuff could be done, and I think it would actually help people, decrease the likelihood of people getting Alzheimer's disease and those sorts of things, because they'd be hanging out with these younger people and they'd be playing, which is really important for us, right, and doing those important things, and they'd be teaching these younger generation what they actually need to be learning. And I don't think we'd have as many behavioural issues as we have these days in schools and in society if we were doing more of that.
I think a lot of the brain degenerative kind of diseases come from, in my personal opinion, a lack of purpose. Like you were saying there, when somebody quits their job. Well, firstly, when they quit their job, a lot of people's jobs are intrinsically linked to their social circles. So all of a sudden you sever those social links a lot of the time. So you've decreased your social circle. You've also got rid of your purpose. And now you're sitting in front of a TV, which, as we all found out during COVID, is fun for 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden you're kind of like, oh, what do I do now? I've watched every episode of the Below Deck I can watch, and now I'm kind of, what do I do? So yeah, I think that people need to have purpose, no matter what it is they do in life. And you made an amazing point there. Do volunteer work, do work that fulfills you, do charity work, do anything that just really keeps you cognitively awake. If you're sitting in front of the TV, your brain's not doing anything, right? So I think that people need purpose. I think what I can't understand, and what I'd love your opinion on, is people that don't have purpose within their job. I feel like you spend so much time of your life working. Why not enjoy it, and why not love to do it? And I think that people, and I'd love to hear your take on this, people that don't have a purpose or in their job, or don't enjoy their job, tend to be a little bit less academic. Like, they tend to be a little bit, boring is not the right term, and that's a horrible term to use, but do you kind of understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I agree. I think having passion for what you do is really important. I I was a professor at university for many years, until I got to the point where it wasn't fulfilling me anymore, and so I left. And a lot of people thought I was a complete dickhead for doing it, because I had a tenure position and a good salary and everything, and I just gave all that up to, in my mid career, to actually start my own business. And so, but I haven't been happier since doing that. Yeah. And it was so important for me to do that, because I had a real passion and I wanted to make a change, and I needed to actually do that. And I'd spent many years being very driven by what I was doing, but I ticked all the boxes that I wanted to tick. And so I needed to move on. And I think a lot of people don't do that. I think a lot of people, tick all the boxes and get to a point where they're just sailing along, and they don't have the challenges anymore, because they've got to the point where they've got to the top of wherever they are, and that's it. And I think when people get to that point, I think they need to go, okay, what's my next challenge? What's my next passion? But yeah, I agree with you. I think, having passion for what you do, and I don't know whether you have to have it at work. I think I do know people who, have jobs where they're not that fulfilled, but then they, do surf lifesaving, or they do something else that they're really passionate about after work. And so their work is just to earn the money, and they know that, and they do that, and then they have something else which they're really passionate about. And so I think you can get it other ways, but you need to get it somewhere. Yeah, you definitely need to be driving yourself with your passion and something that challenges you.
Yeah, and I think that just not getting comfortable, at least for me anyway, is a huge one. If I ever feel, maybe this is more of an ADHD thing, but if I ever feel comfortable in what I'm doing, I feel like I'm not stretching myself. So I feel like I need to, first it was, for me anyway, it was photography, and then I got relatively okay at that, and I thought, okay, well, videography is next, and then it was video editing, and then it was YouTube, and then it was a podcast, and then it was managing a team. So like, I kind of, it's a tick box, but I keep moving myself up, which I feel like everyone should try and do, is stretch themselves, because that's what keeps your cognitive workload or your cognitive ability going, so to speak. I've just noticed the time, so I'm so sorry for taking up tons of your time. But we do have a closing kind of tradition on the podcast, and I suppose for you it would be, what is the biggest lesson you have learned in cognitive neuroscience?
Oh, that's huge. How long have you got? Can I have 10? I think, Oh, there's so many really good ones.
We can take 3. Don't worry.
All right. Well, I think the one that I think people need to understand is that science doesn't actually prove anything. Science can't prove anything because of the fact that we use statistics, and statistics are based on probability. We don't actually ever get to an answer. And what we're trying to do is get closer to the truth, but we don't actually get to the truth. And mathematics is the only science where you can actually prove anything because you actually have proofs. But every other science that's out there is actually just trying to get closer to the truth, but we're never actually going to get to the truth. And so don't believe anything you read in the newspaper or anywhere else, because those studies that they put up and go, oh, they've just discovered blah. They didn't just discover blah. Yeah, they're just getting closer to what we think might be actually the truth. And that's what's important, is that we're always just striving to get closer to the truth. But there is no end point to science. It's a constant battle to work out what's actually going on, and we'll never actually know what's actually going on, which makes it wonderful, but also very frustrating. But it does mean that you can't believe any of that, yeah. And that's why people get frustrated with science. And I know a lot of journalists get frustrated with scientists because we say, well, yes, that's what we think might be happening, but blah, 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 yeah? And there's always caveats to it. But it's something that we always need to keep in mind, that we're never going to actually know what's happening anywhere.
Well, it's a bit like when we were talking about the Beautiful Mind movie. It's like everything's an illusion. It's just kind of what you choose to believe, and it's if people share the same illusion that you do, which is quite a nice round off, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the other one that I was going to bring up, which is that our world is created by our brains and it's not actually out there, and that's beautiful because we can change the way we think, and so therefore our world, our perception of the world can change, and it can be whatever you want it to be. If you hang out with happy people and you do things that really drive you, then your world is wonderful. And if you hang out with shitty people and you don't have anything that really drives you, then you're going to be depressed. So, choose people to hang out with who really motivate you and drive you and make you happy.
Oh, very, very good. And listen, I know that your book's The Connected Species, so I'll definitely be having a look at that. I'll be Amazon priming that today. And listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and tuning in all the way to Australia. You're the first Australian guest we've had.
Oh, wow. There you go.
Yeah, so it's very good.
It's
and I really
nice
appreciate everything.